This video is sponsored by Paradox Interactive. I'd been doing my developer diary recap videos for Imperator Rome pretty inconsistently the last few months, and I was starting to fall really far behind with them. Paradox reached out to help me get them back on track before the game is out. The diaries have not changed in any way, they've just made them happen, so thank you to Paradox for that. Also, I have been working with them on a different type of video that's coming up shortly. I'll be doing a start position breakdown of some of the most interesting nations in the game, and I'm free to look at whatever nations I want. If you have one that you really want to see, let me know in the comments. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get on to the diaries. Diary number 28, Battles and Attrition. When a battle is initiated in Imperator Rome, the battle screen opens up as the two sides fight. This screen consists of a lot of information, and there's a lot of stuff running under the hood for how battles play out. Essentially, it works like this. Both sides have one battle line. This is represented by the little squares in a line for each side, and a unit will fill that square and fight the unit in front of it. The units themselves will then weigh up the different modifiers to their commander, the terrain, experience, discipline, and how their unit type will fare against the unit type in front of them to determine the strength damage and the morale damage given and received each day. If there is no unit in front of it, it'll attempt to fight the unit diagonally across, and based on the unit's maneuverability number, it can fight diagonally further and further down the line. Certain units are inherently more maneuverable than others, but technologies and things can change how units behave. Generally speaking, heavy infantry has low maneuverability, so your unit might be left doing nothing because there's nobody in front of it to damage. An ideal battle is one where all your unit's strengths are being used, and they're all engaged as much as possible. When it comes to battle, there's two phases, the primary and secondary phases. You can assign a preferred unit type to the primary phase, and a preferred unit type to the secondary phase, as well as choose a preferred unit to be placed on the flanks, and how wide the flanking line is, either 2, 5, or 10 cohorts. So in a conventional setup, you'd probably place skirmishers in the first phase, heavy infantry in the second phase, and set some cavalry on the flanks, and maybe set their flanking amount based on the amount you have. You can either spread wide, but run the risk of hitting nothing in front of you, or you can stay small, but have less engaged at once. There's really no one go-to solution, and based on the enemy or terrain you're fighting in, different deployments will have different effects. Maybe you could play it a little risky and send all of your cavalry in first in the first phase, which would deal high damage to skirmishers, and then place light infantry on the flanks. It's a risky maneuver. This could work, but if it didn't initially succeed on the first blow, you'd really be left with not much cavalry to flank and get outflanked yourself in the second phase. On top of this, there are battle tactics that we looked at in a previous diary. These are subject to changing still, but generally, you pick a tactic and it'll have some hard counters against other tactics and to itself, just to further modify the outcomes. Combat can often seem really overwhelming, and a lot of people can end up just saying, "Oh, I'm on a hill, I have more numbers, I should win," which a lot of the time you probably actually will. But if you take the first few battles in a war and study your enemy, you can make educated guesses based on the battle reports and try to play to your strengths. If you notice the enemy use a lot of one type of unit, maybe try and counter-build the armies or rearrange how you do your flanks. It is totally possible to beat an army that's twice your size, even when you have less favorable terrain. The game will reward you for paying attention, so it's worth giving it your attention. The last thing is that when you're about to have a battle, a little indicator will pop up warning you about the outcome. Ultimately, there is still a dice roll every few ticks into a battle to modify the circumstances a little bit randomly, so this indicator isn't always accurate, but it can give you an idea of why an outcome is predicted, such as favorable terrain, numbers, experience, morale, and more. Diary number 29, Trade and Diplomacy. Imperator Rome has 34 unique trade resources, and every city in the game produces one of them. You cannot have a city that produces two types of resources, and you cannot change what a city produces. They are set for life. Every resource has 4 types of modifiers. We'll use grain as an example. Having grain in a province gives a modifier to that entire province. So having a city produce grain would give a 0.10% population growth modifier to that province. Having a surplus of grain, so let's say you have multiple cities that are producing it within a province, that'll provide you with a surplus effect of 0.05% pop growth for every extra surplus you have. Notice that with most resources you get less for the surplus effect than its base amount, so it can at times be better to redirect your surpluses elsewhere. If we did export grain to another one of our provinces or to another country, we'd then get an export modifier, which for grain is plus 5% national manpower. So it's different than the population growth, it's straight to manpower. Lastly, if this happened to be our capital's province and we happen to have a surplus, we'd get the capital surplus effect, which for grain is a plus 10% to national manpower. Every resource has these 4 modifiers with the same conditions, just a different output depending on the type of resource it is. These resources are broken into 5 categories: strategic, growth, population, military, and economy and tech resources. I don't have the time in this video to break them down beyond that, but they all do a lot of different things. So let's move on to exporting. First off, why would you ever get rid of something that gives you a benefit? Well, exporting goods can make money through commerce, and also you can redirect something you have in one place to another to get the benefit elsewhere. Every province will have a number of trade routes depending on a few factors. As a rule, trade routes are only used to import goods. I feel like it would be better suited to being called import routes, to be honest. So it's just to bring something in. Now, if you are exporting, that means there's a province somewhere using its trade route to take that thing in. You don't need a route to send something out. Another rule is that you can only export a surplus of something that you did not import. So if you're Rome and you imported grain from Egypt, you cannot then send that grain somewhere else. It stays in the province that it was sent to. Another thing is that the goods don't physically move from one place to another. It's more of a diplomatic agreement and the resource will just arrive instantly. There is a chance of piracy, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. What type of goods are produced in a given city are fixed, but you can produce your own surplus for every 15 slaves you have working in that city. So again, there are benefits to localizing slaves in one city and then maybe putting a tax modifier on them to get more money out of them. But if you spread them out across the province, you can produce more goods, so that means more benefits or more commerce. And that's basically how trade works. When it comes to trading with another empire, you'll be restricted by your diplomatic range and their opinion of you. Diplomatic range is determined by how close your capital is to theirs, and it's then modified by your country rank. The bigger you get, so too does your rank, and you'll be able to trade and conduct diplomacy with farther out nations. You can also extend it through technologies. Diary number 30 focused on a specific region, Hispania, but I'm not covering these in my recaps. As I mentioned, I'll be doing a start position breakdown video shortly in the future. What I will take this time to say is that I realize there's a lot to be taken in with combat and trade, 2 very stat-driven mechanics in the game. It can often feel quite overwhelming to people who are less familiar with Paradox games, but essentially, with both, you're supposed to sort of form a plan of what you want to achieve, spec your armies or provinces one way, and then just let it play out for a while. So it's not typically something you're down in the weeds with all the time, and part of the fun is figuring out a strategy that works well. Diary number 31 is Interface Improvements. This diary was a sort of catch-all diary to the various improvements since the diaries began. One such improvement was to the governor system. Governors were previously in control of one province. Now a reminder, a province is about 10 to 12 cities. And changing their province policy would affect their loyalty. If their loyalty was low enough, they'd even set their own policy and deny you the ability to change it. Things, however, have changed. Governors are now in control of regions. Regions are the largest categorization of land, containing about 6 to 8 provinces. This change means you'll have a little less micromanagement when remembering so many different governors. Governor policy can still be changed on a per province basis, and it'll now change with oratory power instead of affecting the loyalty of a governor. If a governor's loyalty does drop, it'll still affect the policies and could still lock you out of them. Another new change is the addition of the families screen, allowing you to track the groups of characters as categorized by their families, seeing at a glance what families are the most prominent and what ones have no jobs, causing them to be resentful and disloyal. You can now also conquer or annex another nation and decide what to do with their families, either killing them or integrating them one by one. AI empires will now respond to diplomacy the same instant you send a request, rather than waiting one day to tick by. Eliminating this day removes the unlikely chance that the world may change and it'll affect their response. Attrition has also been changed to have a unit weight system, so now some units will need more supply than others. Elephants, for instance, need 5 times the usual supply, whereas light infantry need half as much. This means that a higher tier or more complex unit will suffer more attrition when compared to smaller, less equipped units. And that's basically it for this one. There's also some other UI improvements like improved sort buttons for characters, filters, and back pages to get back to the previous screens to compare things easier. All good stuff. Diary number 32, Mercenaries. Mercenary armies are scattered all over the map in Imperator Rome, and they can be displayed in the mercenary screen, which is sorted by proximity. Mercenaries don't affect the supply limit of a region until they are in use by a country, and they cannot be attacked. They just sort of exist there, waiting. Mercenaries can be bought with a payment of gold and martial power. They then will act as one of your own armies that receive your technological and national modifiers, and use your manpower pool to replenish if they can. Their upkeep is about 400% the cost of a regular army, and this factors into the cost to disband them, so they can even be expensive to get rid of. If they start in a foreign land on recruitment, they'll be in a state of exile, unable to attack or be attacked by any enemies. Once they enter your borders, then they'll be available for combat. Exile can also happen for other armies when a war comes to an end and your armies are left in foreign territory. You must bring them home before you can really use them for combat again. If you have a mercenary army under your control and you run out of money, there's a chance they will defect to the enemy, so be careful. However, if you have paid them and disbanded them successfully, they'll just move back to their home location and become available for hire again to anyone that wishes to purchase them. Another interesting aspect to the mercenaries is that they often have a commander with very high martial, and if you're looking for a commander in a war that's pretty good, it can be worth it to pick up one of the mercenaries and just have your own units kind of follow them around into battle. He'll take command of them in battle, and you'll get the best of both worlds. This also works in reverse. If you pick up a mercenary army and they have a low martial commander, it's probably best to have them follow one of your good commanders into battle. Now, mismanagement of characters can also lead to them becoming mercenaries. They'll take their low loyalty and unfulfilled ambitions, take their armies and navies with them, and become mercenaries for life. You can't do anything about that then. You can't even fight them. I mean, you could always just hire them and use them, or if you really bore a grudge, you could hire them and just send them to their death into like an unwinnable battle, I suppose. But there's really no benefit to do it. Once they've become a mercenary, that's kind of it for that character. Diary number 33, Monarchies and Legitimacy. This diary is about a different form of government and playstyle, the monarchy. A monarchy government has one ruler that serves until death. They have close to absolute control of everything. They don't need to get the approval of a Senate body to wage wars or engage in diplomacy or to change laws. What they do have to watch out for is legitimacy. Legitimacy will affect the happiness of all free men and the loyalty of all characters in the country, and also plays a part in the succession. To keep up legitimacy, you can increase stability, have a good court philosopher character, and have a popular ruler. You can also pay civic power to increase it immediately, but you'll also increase tyranny as well. You'll lose legitimacy with high war exhaustion, ruler corruption, and when other characters support a different heir to the throne than the designated successor. The next successor is determined by the type of monarchy, and there's several different types of monarchy in the game. You can have inheritance in age order with males being preferred, or you could have it without a gender preference. You can have siblings of the monarchy taking priority over the children, or you can have children of the ruler being preferred, but the royal family will marry their own members, including sibling to sibling. What's going on there? In the government screen, the 4 most popular successors will be displayed. It's usually dominated by the next designated heir as the person who's going to get it, as that is what the law of government says should happen. The other 3 are deemed pretenders, and being a pretender means they'll have significant monthly loyalty hits that will tick down over time. To keep these characters happy, they'll need to be bribed, given jobs and given other things to keep them loyal on a regular basis. With jobs comes popularity though, and improves their skills, which means more people are probably likely to support them for the succession. A person is likely to back a pretender if they become friends with the pretender or they themselves have low loyalty. Other things like popularity and certain skills and traits affect it too. When the ruler inevitably dies and the succession happens, the legitimacy of the realm will be reset to 60, plus a modifier based on the religious unity of the country. Religious unity is a value determined from how many pops you have of your religion within your country. Legitimacy is then reduced by 2 points for every character employed in a position that supported a pretender. So basically, pretenders are going to lose loyalty. You'll have to keep up with that. Other characters that are less loyal will back the pretenders, and while it's not too much of a direct problem on its own, it will hit you when the next succession happens. What's really dangerous is if a pretender's loyalty was below 33% when the succession happens, they will then assemble an army of as many troops as they could afford with their own personal wealth. And they will be a disloyal army within your country, not allowing you to control them. You can, however, spend oratory power to persuade some of the troops to desert, or you can bribe the pretenders for loyalty and demand that their supporters follow you instead. This mostly costs oratory power to achieve, but it has cooldowns, so you can't do 10 bribes or persuades in a row. So if loyalty was bad enough, it will be an issue. If you do bring the pretenders' loyalty back up, it can be a route to at least gaining back control of the army, though they still will not just disband unless you remove them bit by bit over time through desertion and rewards for their service. Again, this will cost oratory power and gold. If for some reason you just didn't have the oratory power or the time or the loyalty was bad enough, your last option is to make them a mercenary. You can spend a large sum of gold to basically just turn a pretender army into a permanent mercenary, eliminating the threat to your internal stability. And that is basically Monarchies. Diary number 34, Navies and War. Navies in Imperator Rome act largely as transport vessels for your troops, and as something to stop the transport of enemy troops. As such, there's only one naval unit in the game, the Trireme. These need a port and access to wood in the port's province to be built, and ports are already set at predetermined locations and cannot be built or destroyed. When a navy is docked at a port, it cannot be attacked or destroyed unless the port is captured on land, which forces the navy out to sea. With naval combat, there are some abilities or stances to place the navy in. Ramming tactics will give more offensive damage at the cost of defense, and boarding tactics will give you more defense at the cost of offense. You can also raid port, which is an army ability that steals pops from adjacent ports and turns them into slaves at your capital, each one raising aggressive expansion by 1. These are essentially teleported back, just like trade goods. Nothing travels by sea and there's no inventory on ships. The only thing that moves by sea is armies. They need 1 boat for every 1 unit. In naval combat, it's not really shown, but it's essentially one phase and an all-out fight for every ship to try and engage every other ship at the same time. They are just attempting this though. A positioning value determined by the marshal of the commander and a random roll will decide how many of your ships connect with theirs. This leaves room for your ships to connect with nothing, or actually mistakenly connect with their own ships, in which case they will re-roll the next day. When 2 ships do engage, they take an offensive modifier and subtract the enemy's defensive modifier and work away at each other. Other modifiers will affect whether it's morale damage or strength damage, and if it's the former, the ship may just end up retreating. If it's the latter, they might be sunk. And that's basically it for naval combat. This diary did also mention pirates briefly, which is essentially a chance at a pirate fleet spawning on a coastal city that has a high commerce value. They cannot spawn more than 10 ships at once, and essentially this can be combated with laws and inventions to prevent it happening. There's also a section in this diary for war and how it works. War in Imperator Rome can be declared on anyone at any time, but you will take a hit to your stability if you don't have a casus belli, or CB for short. There are 6 different types of CB in the game. The main one is a claim. You can earn a claim to a city either through events or by fabricating one yourself in diplomacy with oratory power. If a country is supporting rebels in your country, you'll have a CB against them. If a country sends you an insult, you'll have a CB against them. If you are guaranteeing someone's independence, you'll get a CB to attack their attackers should they be in a war. If you have an ally that suddenly breaks their alliance with you, you'll get a CB against them. And if you have a subject that breaks away, you'll get a CB against them as well. Again, you can wage these wars without CBs, but your stability will take a hit, and you'll have increased aggressive expansion. These are hindrance modifiers that will affect your own people and the diplomacy around you. So if you don't mind spending the religion power to increase stability, or you can handle the stability hit or the aggressive expansion hit, it can often be worth just taking your foes by surprise. When declaring a war, you'll set a war goal. These don't have to be the same as the CB. For instance, you can have a claim on a province or a city, but then go to war to show superiority. You won't take a stability hit in this case, as while you're not fighting for your CB, you do have a reason to go to war, which is kind of all about just giving the other nation a warning. There are 3 war goals in the game: Conquest, Show Superiority, and Show Naval Superiority. Conquest basically means that you've claimed a province, and if you have the entirety of that province during the war, then a ticking war score will climb for a year until you can end the war for it. Superiority nets you war score for every battle you win, and once you're over 10 war score, it'll start ticking up. The higher the score, the more you can typically claim or get from the enemy, regardless of claims. In a future video, I'll break down everything to do with war, war score, what to claim, and how the post-war negotiation screen works. It wasn't really talked about here too much in depth, and it's quite a big topic, so it kind of deserves its own thing later. Allies were also mentioned in this developer diary, but it has been changed in a later developer diary, just a recent one actually, and I'll be covering that in my next recap video. Diary number 35, Tribes. Another form of government after republics and monarchies are tribes. These are broken into tribal chiefdoms, kingdoms, and federations. The base premise for a tribal government is that the ruler is typically set for life, but when they die, a new one will be elected from a number of clan leaders, all of whom command their own retinues of loyal troops. The clan leaders recruit and maintain their own armies without using your manpower. However, you do still pay a little bit of upkeep for them, but largely the clan leader pays themselves. There's always 3 clan leaders, and the bigger your country rank, the more clan leaders there will be. As tribes can vary in size and even move around the map, tribes have a centralization value. This is how settled a tribal nation is. If centralization value is negative, they will receive bonuses to migration and tribesman output, but also have bigger retinues and more influential clan chiefs. Positive centralization will have increased civilization value and cheaper freemen to citizen pop promotion costs. This will start paving the way for you to change your government into a monarchy or a republic. There's no direct way to influence centralization with power, resources, or gold, unlike the other governments which can affect their things with different power. Instead, it'll be through managing your clan chiefs and actions you perform in the game, such as migrating or enacting different laws. Migration itself will be discussed in the next diary video. So, generally speaking, a tribe behaves very differently to the other forms of government. You have semi-autonomous armies you need to appease, and sharing the power will keep centralization down, allowing for your tribesmen pops to flourish, but with low citizen counts, your research will suffer. So the focus is very much on high manpower and money from slavery. Once you've acquired enough of both, you can decide to keep pushing aggressively, never really becoming civilized, or looking inward to reform your government and start getting some citizens for trade and research. And that is it for the last 8 developer diaries since my previous video. Remember, if you want to check out all the developer diaries, either in text format on the Paradox forums or my videos, they are posted in the description. My next developer diary recap video from me will be the last one before the game comes out in about 1 month from now, where I'll cover the next 8 diaries just in time for release. However, coming up soon, like I said, I'll be picking and choosing different nations to showcase in a start position video, so let me know what you want to see from that below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.